I thought I understood war. I had studied battles across 100 worlds. I knew the sound of artillery, the stench of blood. But then, I saw humans fight. And in that moment I realized, nothing in the galaxy could have prepared me for this. First contact gone wrong. Commander Thesix floated in the medical bay of the research vessel Enlightenment, her crystalline exoskeleton still bearing the scorch marks from weapons that shouldn't exist. The Galactic Council's investigators waited patiently as she gathered strength to continue her testimony. Her 4 eyes focused on different points in the room, a sign of deep trauma among her species. When she finally spoke, her harmonic voice carried the weight of witnessing an entire civilization's understanding of warfare crumble. The Kalari Dominion had ruled 17 star systems for 3 millennia when they first detected the human colony ship Pioneer's Dream drifting at the edge of explored space. Thesix remembered standing on the bridge of the warship Sovereign's Pride, watching the scan data with her superior, Admiral Vorthak. The human vessel was laughably primitive by Kalari standards. It used rotation for artificial gravity, chemical propulsion for emergency maneuvers, and its hull was made from simple steel alloys that any plasma beam could punch through like paper. Admiral Vorthak had laughed when the tactical analysis came through. The ship carried 10,000 humans in cryogenic sleep, heading toward an uninhabited world they planned to colonize. Their weapons consisted of mining lasers and asteroid deflection systems. They had no shields, no faster-than-light communication, and their computer systems were generations behind even the most basic Kalari technology. The Admiral declared it would be a mercy to end their journey before they wasted more resources on their doomed colonization attempt. Thesix had agreed with the assessment at the time. The Kalari way was efficient and logical. Weaker species were absorbed into the Dominion or eliminated if they proved incompatible. These humans, isolated and primitive, would serve better as a cautionary tale to other species considering unauthorized expansion into Kalari space. The order was given to disable their ship and capture the survivors for processing. The first warning sign came when the Kalari boarding party tried to access the human ship's computers. Instead of surrendering their data, the humans had triggered something called a dead man switch. Every system on the ship began broadcasting a distress signal that contained not just a call for help, but detailed scans of the Kalari vessels, their weapon signatures, and tactical analysis that was disturbingly accurate for such a primitive species. Captain Jenna Rodriguez was the first human Thesix ever saw in person. She had been awakened from cryo-sleep when the Kalari ships appeared, and she stood on her bridge wearing a simple jumpsuit surrounded by 20th century technology by Kalari standards. When Admiral Vorthak demanded her surrender, Rodriguez did something that confused every Kalari officer present. She smiled and asked if they had children. The Admiral, thrown off by the unexpected question, confirmed that Kalari reproduced like most species. Rodriguez nodded and said she was sorry for what was about to happen, but humans had children too, and 10,000 of them were sleeping on her ship. She explained that humans had a saying, "A cornered animal is the most dangerous." Then she asked the Admiral if he knew what happened when you cornered 10,000 humans who had nowhere to run. Before Vorthak could respond, Rodriguez triggered something the Kalari had never encountered in 3,000 years of conquest. The colony ship vented its atmosphere in directed bursts, turning itself into a spinning projectile. The mining lasers, supposedly too weak to threaten military vessels, had been modified during the confrontation to focus on single points, superheating small sections of Kalari hull plating until they failed explosively. But the real shock came when the human colonists began waking up from cryosleep. Instead of 10,000 civilians, the Kalari found themselves facing 10,000 individuals who had been selected not just for their colonization skills, but for their ability to survive anything. Every human adult had received basic military training before boarding the colony ship. Earth's governments had learned from history that space colonization would be dangerous, and they had prepared their people accordingly. The battle should have lasted minutes. The Kalari had superior firepower, shields, and every tactical advantage. Instead, it became a nightmare that stretched for 18 hours. The humans used their colony ship's rotation to create unpredictable firing angles. They launched escape pods filled with mining explosives, turning them into guided missiles. When Kalari boarding parties finally breached the hull, they found humans had turned every corridor into a kill zone. Thesix watched from the command deck as humans did things that defied all military logic. Parents formed human shields to protect their children while those children assembled improvised weapons from life support components. Engineers deliberately exposed themselves to vacuum to seal breaches with their own bodies, giving others time to escape. The ship's doctor, an elderly man named David Chen, walked into a room full of Kalari soldiers carrying medical supplies and no weapons. When they demanded his surrender, he simply began treating wounded humans while completely ignoring the guns pointed at him. The Kalari soldiers didn't know how to respond. Their entire military doctrine was based on enemies who fought to win. Humans seemed to fight just to make their enemies pay for every inch of ground. When a section of the ship was about to be overrun, the humans inside would destroy it themselves rather than let it fall into Kalari hands. They weren't trying to win, they were trying to make victory so expensive that the Kalari would regret ever starting the fight. Captain Rodriguez's final transmission before the colony ship was destroyed became infamous throughout Kalari space. She looked directly at the communication screen, her face calm despite the chaos around her, and spoke words that would haunt Thesix forever. Rodriguez said that humans knew they couldn't win this battle, but they could make sure the Kalari remembered it. She said that humans had been killing each other for thousands of years and had gotten very good at it. Now the Kalari had given them a reason to work together. The colony ship Pioneer's Dream was destroyed with all hands, but not before it had crippled 2 Kalari destroyers and killed more Dominion soldiers than any single vessel in recorded history. The mining lasers had carved the human word, remember, into the hull of the Sovereign's Pride before the end. Admiral Vorthak declared victory, but every Kalari who had witnessed the battle knew something fundamental had changed. The distress signal the humans had sent contained more than just tactical data. It included video recordings of the attack, personal messages from the colonists to their families on Earth, and a complete record of everything the Kalari had said and done. The signal propagated through human communication networks faster than the Kalari could intercept it. Within days, every human in the galaxy knew that their species had been attacked without provocation. Thesix paused in her testimony to show the investigators the scar on her upper arm, where a human child, no more than 12 years old, had attacked her with a modified welding torch. The child had known it would die, but it had fought anyway because, as it screamed while attacking, the Kalari had killed its parents. That was when Thesix began to understand that humans didn't fight wars the way other species did. They took it personally. The Kalari Dominion had defeated dozens of species over the millennia. Some fought bravely, others surrendered quickly, but all of them fought for logical reasons like territory, resources, or survival. Humans seemed to fight for something else entirely. They fought for ideas, for revenge, for each other, and sometimes just to prove they could. The destruction of the Pioneer's Dream should have been a simple police action. Instead, it became the first shot in a war that would destroy everything the Kalari thought they knew about combat. The escalation. The Kalari Dominion expected humanity's response to be diplomatic protests or perhaps a few retaliatory raids on frontier outposts. They had destroyed one colony ship with 10,000 humans. Earth's population was barely 8 billion, spread across a handful of systems. The Kalari controlled 17 systems with a combined population of over 40 billion. The mathematics of war seemed clear. What Thesix witnessed 3 months after the Pioneer's Dream incident shattered those calculations. Humanity didn't send a fleet. They sent a message, delivered by a single unmarked probe that appeared in orbit around the Kalari homeworld, having somehow bypassed every defense perimeter. The message was from someone called General Sarah Montgomery, and it was broadcast on every communication frequency the Kalari used. Montgomery appeared to be a middle-aged human woman with gray streaking through her dark hair. She spoke calmly, without anger or visible emotion. She informed the Kalari Dominion that humanity had voted, and the decision was unanimous. The Kalari had killed 10,000 humans who were trying to build a new life peacefully. Humanity would now kill 10,000 Kalari for each human life lost. She said this wasn't revenge or hatred, it was mathematics. The message ended with coordinates and a timestamp, giving the Kalari exactly 1 week to evacuate a military station in the Proxima system. Admiral Vorthak had laughed at the threat. The station housed 50,000 Kalari military personnel and was protected by automated defense platforms that could destroy a fleet. He sent additional forces to Proxima as a show of strength. Thesix was assigned to the reinforcement fleet, commanding a squadron of fighters. They arrived at Proxima 3 days before the human deadline. What happened at Proxima became known as the Ghost Strike in Kalari military history. At the exact moment Montgomery had specified, things started going wrong throughout the station. Life support systems began producing toxic gases instead of oxygen. addition, gravity generators reversed their polarity randomly, crushing some sections while leaving others in zero gravity. The station's own defense weapons turned inward and began firing on the structure they were meant to protect. The Kalari couldn't understand how it was happening. There were no human ships within light years of the station, no weapons fire, no boarding parties, nothing that resembled conventional warfare. It took them 6 hours to realize that the station's computer systems had been compromised months ago, perhaps even before the Pioneer's Dream incident. Humans had been planning for the possibility of alien contact going wrong, and they had prepared accordingly. The virus that infected Proxima Station was unlike anything in Kalari's cybersecurity experience. It didn't just corrupt data or shut down systems. It learned, adapted, and evolved in real time. When technicians tried to purge it from one system, it would migrate to another. When they isolated infected computers, it would transmit itself through power fluctuations in the electrical grid. The virus seemed to understand Kalari's psychology and deliberately targeted systems that would cause maximum panic. But the truly terrifying part came when evacuation ships tried to leave the station. The virus had infected them too, but it didn't activate until they were far from Proxima. Then it broadcast their locations to human forces that appeared out of nowhere. Small wolf packs of modified civilian vessels that shouldn't have been capable of threatening military ships. The humans had turned cargo haulers into missile platforms and mining vessels into assault craft. Thessix's squadron engaged a group of these converted ships near Proxima's third moon. The battle was unlike any military engagement in Kalari training. The human ships didn't maintain formation or follow predictable attack patterns. Each vessel fought independently, making decisions that seemed insane by military standards. One human ship deliberately rammed a Kalari cruiser just to deploy boarding pods at point-blank range. Another used its cargo hold to scatter millions of metal fragments, creating a debris field that destroyed fighter engines. The boarding parties were the worst part. Thessix had to abandon her fighter when humans breached the carrier she was stationed on. The boarders weren't professional soldiers. They were volunteers, ordinary humans who had signed up to fight after seeing the videos from the Pioneer's Dream. They wore improvised armor made from salvaged materials and carried weapons that looked like they'd been assembled in garage workshops. But they fought with a fury that professional soldiers couldn't match. Thessix watched a human engineer named Marcus Webb hold off an entire Kalari security team, using nothing but industrial tools and his knowledge of the ship's layout. Webb had studied captured Kalari vessel schematics and knew exactly where to strike to cause maximum damage. He didn't try to survive the encounter. His only goal was to disable the carrier's faster-than-light drive so it couldn't escape. When he finally fell, he was smiling because he'd accomplished his mission. The siege of Proxima Station lasted exactly 100 hours. At the end, 43,000 Kalari were dead, and the station was a lifeless hulk. The 7,000 survivors were allowed to evacuate, but their ships were tagged with tracking devices that the Kalari couldn't remove. General Montgomery sent another message, reminding the Dominion that they still owed humanity 96,000 more lives. The Kalari response was swift and brutal. Admiral Vorthak assembled the largest fleet in Dominion history and headed for Earth. 300 warships, each capable of glassing a planet's surface. Thessix commanded a battlecruiser in the fleet, though she had begun having doubts about the war. The humans had shown they could hurt the Kalari, but surely they couldn't stand against such overwhelming force. The fleet arrived at Earth to find the planet surrounded by debris. At first, the Kalari thought humanity had destroyed itself rather than face conquest. Then the debris began moving. The humans had dismantled asteroids, decommissioned space stations, and even their own orbital infrastructure to create a shield of trillions of objects around their world. Any ship approaching Earth would have to navigate through a constantly shifting maze of obstacles. Hidden among the debris were weapons platforms, some automated, others crewed by volunteers who knew they were on suicide missions. The platforms were connected by tight beam communications that the Kalari couldn't intercept, coordinating their attacks with devastating precision. But the real genius of the human defense was that they had turned Earth's gravity well into a weapon. Objects in the debris field were carefully calculated to create chain reactions. Destroying one piece would send others careening into Kalari ships. Admiral Vorthak ordered a bombardment from beyond the debris field, but the humans had anticipated this. They had built mass drivers on Earth's surface, electromagnetic cannons that could launch projectiles at significant fractions of light speed. The projectiles were simple tungsten rods, but at those velocities, they hit like nuclear weapons. The Kalari fleet found itself in a shooting match where the humans could hide behind their debris shield while firing back with devastating accuracy. The battle for Earth lasted 2 weeks. The Kalari eventually broke through the debris field, but they lost 90 ships doing it. When they finally reached bombardment range, they discovered that humanity had one more surprise. Every major city on Earth had been evacuated underground. The humans had spent months building bunkers and tunnels, moving their entire civilization beneath the surface. They were prepared to let the Kalari glass their world, and then emerge to rebuild. General Montgomery appeared on communication channels again, this time broadcasting from an underground command center. She looked tired but determined. She told Admiral Vorthak that humanity had already seeded 12 other worlds with hidden colonies. Even if Earth fell, humans would survive, and they would remember. They would teach their children about the Kalari, and those children would teach their children. Humanity would spend generations if necessary, but they would have their 100,000 lives. Thesix was on the bridge when Admiral Vorthak made his decision. He looked at the tactical display showing the ruins of his fleet and the scarred but unbroken Earth below. For the first time in Kalari history, a Dominion admiral ordered a retreat without achieving victory. As the fleet withdrew, human ships emerged from hidden bases throughout the solar system to harry their departure. The message was clear. Humanity could have destroyed more Kalari ships, but was choosing to let them leave. Part 3. The Reckoning. The retreat from Earth marked the beginning of the end for the Kalari Dominion, though few recognized it at the time. Thesix transferred to intelligence operations, trying to understand how a species with inferior technology had fought the Dominion to a standstill. What she discovered over the following months would have been fascinating if it hadn't been so terrifying. Humanity had never stopped preparing for alien contact. Every science fiction story, every movie about invasion, every theoretical paper about interstellar warfare had been carefully studied and incorporated into contingency planning. When the Kalari destroyed the Pioneer's dream, they hadn't caught humanity off guard. They had simply activated protocols that humans had hoped they would never need to use. The intelligence reports that reached Thesix painted a picture of a species that approached war like no other. Humans didn't just mobilize their military, their entire civilization pivoted toward a single goal. Artists created propaganda that made citizens eager to volunteer. Scientists abandoned their personal research to develop weapons. Children collected scrap metal to be turned into ammunition. Even their entertainment industry converted to producing training simulations and morale-boosting content. But the most disturbing discovery was that humans had been deliberately holding back. They possessed weapons they refused to use, not out of mercy, but because they wanted to prove they could win without them. Nuclear weapons, biological agents, antimatter bombs, all shelved because humanity wanted to beat the Kalari conventionally. The message was clear. Humans weren't fighting for survival. They were making a statement. 6 months after the failed Earth invasion, the war entered its final phase. Humanity launched what they called Operation Liberation, though the Kalari would remember it as the Cascade. It began with simultaneous uprisings on every world the Dominion had conquered. Thesix couldn't understand how humans had coordinated with species they had never met before, until she learned about something called the Underground Railroad Protocol. Human infiltrators had spent months sneaking onto Kalari slave worlds, not to attack, but to teach. They shared the story of their own history, how humans had once enslaved each other, and how they had fought to end that practice. They taught resistance techniques, guerrilla warfare, and most importantly, they taught hope. They showed enslaved species footage of the Kalari retreating from Earth and proved that the Dominion could be beaten. The Yelthar were the first to rise. A silicon-based species that the Kalari had enslaved for their ability to process complex calculations, they had been considered completely pacified, but humans had shown them how to hide aggressive code in their computational outputs. Every system the Yelthar had worked on for the past century contained hidden vulnerabilities. When they activated, the Dominion's entire financial system collapsed in minutes. The Morvac followed within days. An aquatic species forced to work in Kalari underwater mining operations, they had learned from human advisors how to use their environment as a weapon. They flooded entire cities, turned water treatment facilities into poison distribution systems, and transformed their mining equipment into weapons of war. The Kalari had never considered that the Morvac might fight back because they had seemed so docile for so long. Thesix was assigned to suppress the rebellion on Kalar 7, a world where 3 different enslaved species had risen simultaneously. She arrived to find Kalari administrators fleeing in panic from beings they had controlled for centuries. The slaves weren't just fighting for freedom, they were fighting with human tactics and human fury. They had learned that victory wasn't about being stronger, it was about wanting it more than your enemy. The decisive battle came at Thessalon Station, the Dominion's military command center. General Montgomery led a combined fleet of human ships and vessels crewed by liberated species. The Kalari had superior numbers and defensive positions, but they were fighting an enemy that had stopped caring about casualties. Human ships would deliberately sacrifice themselves to create openings for Allied vessels. Liberated slaves fought with the desperation of beings who would rather die than return to bondage. Thesix commanded the station's fighter defenses during the battle. She watched human pilots perform maneuvers that should have killed them, pushing their bodies beyond biological limits through sheer willpower. One pilot, call sign Phoenix, continued fighting after his life support failed, flying on manual control while slowly suffocating. His final action was to crash into the station's shield generator, bringing down the defenses with his death. The battle lasted 18 hours. When it ended, Thessalon Station was in human hands, and the Kalari Dominion's command structure had collapsed. But instead of pressing their advantage, the humans did something unprecedented. General Montgomery broadcast an offer of conditional surrender to all Kalari forces. They could keep their homeworld and their freedom, but the Dominion would be dissolved, all slaves freed, and war reparations paid to affected species. Admiral Vorthak, who had survived the war to become the senior military leader, wanted to fight to the death rather than accept terms from primitives. But Thesix and other officers who had faced humans in combat convinced him otherwise. They had seen what humans were capable of when they were angry. They didn't want to see what they would do if pushed to true extremity. The surrender ceremony took place on the ruins of Thessalon Station. General Montgomery met Admiral Vorthak in person for the first time. She was smaller than he had expected, showing signs of age and exhaustion from the war, but her eyes held something that made even the admiral step back. It wasn't hatred or triumph, it was disappointment. She looked at the assembled Kalari leadership like a teacher regarding students who had failed a crucial test. Montgomery's speech at the ceremony became required reading at military academies across the galaxy. She said that humanity had dreamed of meeting other intelligent life for centuries. They had imagined sharing knowledge, exploring together, building something greater than any one species could achieve alone. Instead, the Kalari had forced them to demonstrate why humans had been killing each other for millennia and gotten very good at it. She explained that humans fought differently because they remembered differently. Every war, every atrocity, every triumph and defeat had been preserved in their history. They learned from their ancestors' mistakes and victories. When the Kalari attacked, they weren't just fighting modern humanity. They were fighting every human who had ever lived, every lesson learned in blood, every strategy born from desperation. The peace treaty, known as the Thessalon Accords, restructured the entire galactic political system. The Kalari Dominion was replaced by a confederation of free worlds, with humans and formerly enslaved species as equal partners. Humanity insisted on transparency in all governmental functions, sharing of technology between species, and regular rotation of leadership to prevent any one species from dominating. But the most significant change was the establishment of the Memorial Fleet. Ships from every species would patrol together, carrying records of the war and its lessons. Their mission was to ensure that no species would ever again attempt to build an empire through conquest. The fleet's flagship was a rebuilt version of the Pioneer's Dream, crewed by descendants of the colonists who had died in the first attack. Thesix was appointed as the Kalari representative to the Memorial Fleet, a position she accepted with mixed feelings. She had lost friends in the war, seen her civilization humbled, watched everything she believed about strength and superiority crumble. But she had also learned something valuable. True strength wasn't about technology or numbers. It was about the willingness to stand for something greater than yourself. During her service on the Memorial Fleet, Thesix worked closely with human crew members. She learned about their history, their wars, their struggles to overcome their own violent nature. She discovered that humans didn't glorify war. They hated it. But they had learned that sometimes the only way to preserve peace was to be so good at war that no one would dare disturb it. Captain Jennifer Park, a descendant of one of the Pioneer's Dream colonists, became Thesix's closest human friend. Park explained that humans had a saying, "If you want peace, prepare for war." But humanity had learned a corollary. If you must fight, fight so hard that your enemy's grandchildren will remember to leave you alone. The transformation of galactic society was remarkable. Species that had been enslaved for centuries began developing their own technologies and cultures. Trade flourished between worlds that had once been forcibly united under Kalari rule. The exchange of ideas and knowledge accelerated technological development beyond anything the Dominion had achieved through conquest. Thesix often reflected on how different things might have been if the Kalari had approached the pioneer's dream with curiosity instead of aggression. 10,000 humans had died in that first encounter, but their deaths had freed billions. They had proven that courage was contagious, that hope could spread across species, and that freedom was worth any price. Years later, when Thesix gave her final testimony to the Galactic Council's Historical Commission, she was asked what lesson the galaxy should take from the Human-Kalari War. She thought for a long moment before answering. The lesson, she said, was that some species evolved sharp teeth, others developed camouflage, and some grew thick armor. Humans had evolved something far more dangerous. They had evolved the ability to hold grudges and the creativity to act on them, but more importantly, they had evolved the wisdom to forgive when the fighting was done. The Kalari had killed 10,000 humans and started a war that claimed millions of lives across dozens of species. Yet when victory was achieved, humanity chose reconciliation over revenge. They had proven they could destroy the Kalari completely, but chose to help them rebuild instead. The war memorial on Earth bore an inscription that Thesix visited every year on the anniversary of the Pioneer's Dream incident. It read, "We did not seek this war, but we ended it. We did not wish to kill, but we proved we could. We do not forget our dead, but we forgive their killers. Let this monument stand as a warning to those who would bring war to peaceful peoples. Humanity remembers." Thesix concluded her testimony with a warning to future generations. Humans were not the strongest species in the galaxy, nor the most advanced, but they were the most adaptable, the most determined, and the most dangerous when provoked. They had turned a colonial massacre into a war of liberation that freed a dozen species. They had transformed defeat into victory through sheer refusal to accept loss. The galaxy had learned that humans would rather die on their feet than live on their knees. They would fight with sticks and stones if necessary, turn their entire civilization into a weapon, and sacrifice everything for the idea of freedom. But they had also shown that they would rather build than destroy, rather teach than conquer, and rather forgive than seek revenge once the fighting was done. As Thesix left the commission chambers, she touched the human peace symbol she now wore alongside her Kalari rank insignia. It was a reminder of the war's most important lesson. The humans had won not because they were better at war, but because they were better at remembering why peace was worth fighting for. They had looked at the stars and seen potential friends, and when forced to fight, they had fought to create a galaxy where that dream could still come true. The last transmission from the void. War ended with Thesix's words echoing through the chamber. "Beware of humans, not because they are cruel, but because they are kind. Not because they seek war, but because they seek peace. And when you threaten what they love, they will teach you why their home planet's history is written in blood, and why they chose to reach for the stars anyway."